My sister slept with my fiancé and got pregnant to ruin my wedding. Aren't you happy for me? She smirked, sitting on my couch. I stared at her until she left, then opened my laptop. The revenge I planned would change everything. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know, they say it's perfectly normal for siblings to grow up with a healthy dose of jealousy. It's practically a cornerstone of childhood, isn't it? The endless fights over who gets the bigger piece of cake, the remote control, the window seat on a long car ride. My sister, Sabrina, and we certainly checked all those boxes. We grew up in a state of carefully negotiated tolerance, a fragile peace punctuated by a constant, humming undercurrent of competition. It was in everything we did. But our story didn't stop at dolls and board games. It spiraled into something much, much darker. There was always something fundamentally different about the way Sabrina competed. It wasn't just the playful rivalry I saw between my friends and their siblings. It was predatory. She had this innate ability to turn the most mundane activities into a high-stakes battle for dominance. I remember one summer afternoon, we must have been 8 and 10, we decided to have a dance-off in the living room. For me, it was just a silly way to pass the time. For her, it was a performance. She was focused, intense, her every move calculated. When my clumsy, goofy dancing somehow won more laughs, and thus, the win, from our visiting cousins, the change in her was instant. The music hadn't even faded, and her face crumpled. And that was her signature move. The win was never the end, it was the trigger. She would immediately run, wailing, to my parents, her face a perfect mask of tragic injustice. Her imagination was a powerful weapon. She'd spin these elaborate tales of how I had pushed her, or called her a name, or cheated. She could manipulate the narrative with the skill of a seasoned playwright, always casting herself as the fragile, wounded princess and me as the heartless, cruel villain. And my parents, bless their hearts, fell for it. Every single time. They were utterly bewitched by her tears. Her supposed vulnerability was a magnet for their sympathy, and over the years, their need to protect her from me became a fortress. My word meant nothing against her sobs. This pattern, repeated daily, weekly, yearly, compounded into something truly damaging. Their trust in me withered, while their perception of her as the perpetually endangered younger child solidified into an unshakable truth. I remember one Christmas, we both got new dolls. Mine was a simple, cloth doll. Hers was an expensive, porcelain one she had begged for. She grew bored of hers within an hour and wanted mine. When I refused, she waited until I left the room, took my doll, and deliberately snapped one of its legs off. Then she started screaming. By the time my parents ran in, she was cradling my broken doll, sobbing about how I had done it out of jealousy because hers was prettier. I was the one who got sent to my room, my Christmas ruined, while she was comforted with cookies and cuddles. She got my doll in the end, of course. My mother fixed it and gave it to her, saying she needed it more to feel better. Sabrina was learning a crucial lesson. With the right performance, she could have anything she wanted. And often, what she wanted most was whatever belonged to me. I have to admit, I probably played a part in enabling this whole dynamic. Being the older sister came with a set of unwritten rules, a silent contract I was expected to honor. Be the grown-up, Audrey, my mother's voice was a constant refrain in my head. You know better. Set a good example for your sister. This translated into a simple code: do not complain. Absorb the injustice, swallow the frustration, and maintain a calm, mature facade. So, when Sabrina would unleash her latest theatrical production of victimhood, and my parents would turn to me, their faces etched with disappointment, I simply shut down. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't raise my voice. I would stand there in silence. To them, my silence was a confession. It was the quiet admission of a guilty party. It never crossed their minds that my silence wasn't born of guilt, but of utter, soul-crushing exhaustion. It was the silence of a child who has learned, through bitter repetition, that her voice does not matter. Her truth is irrelevant. So why waste the breath? This toxic feedback loop became the defining feature of our family life. They sided with her manipulations, and my silence confirmed their bias. The broken vase incident became legendary in our family, a story my mom would sometimes tell with a sad shake of her head about my difficult phase. I was 12, deeply engrossed in The Hobbit in my bedroom. Sabrina was supposed to be dusting the living room, a chore she despised. I heard the sickening crash of shattering crystal, followed by a theatrical gasp and then the inevitable, piercing wail. I ran out to find my late grandmother's prized vase, the one thing my dad cherished most from her, in 1,000 pieces on the hardwood floor. Sabrina was standing a few feet away, a feather duster in her hand, her eyes wide with what I now recognize as calculated fear. As soon as she saw me, her face crumpled, and she pointed. Audrey scared me. She jumped out and yelled, and I dropped it. My parents rushed in. The scene was perfectly set. My mom scooped up the sobbing Sabrina, murmuring comforting words. My dad stared at the wreckage, his face pale with grief, and then he looked at me. Not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment that hurt more than any shouting ever could. Audrey, he said, his voice barely a whisper. How could you? I tried. I really did. I was in my room. I didn't do anything. But my words were like pebbles against a tidal wave. They were swept away by her tears. I was grounded for the entire summer. My allowance was suspended to help pay for a replacement, though we all knew it was irreplaceable. Sabrina, for her trauma, was taken out for a special shopping trip the next day. It was around this time I had a meeting with my school counselor about high school courses. She asked about my college plans. I mumbled something non-committal. She mentioned the importance of a college fund. That phrase hung in the air. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that while my parents were meticulously paying for Sabrina's prestigious and expensive dance academy, the idea of a college fund for me was a forgotten whisper. My role was to be the responsible one, the one who would figure it out. Her role was to be the star, the one whose dreams were bankrolled by our family's guilt and adoration. By the time we hit middle school, Sabrina's tactics had evolved. She was no longer content with just dominating the domestic sphere, she was ready to take her show on the road. Her new stage was my academic and social life, and her new method of torture was far more sophisticated and publicly humiliating. She started signing my name on sign-up sheets. Not for one or two things. For everything. Auditions for the school play, tryouts for the girls' basketball team, the volunteer list for the library book drive, the committee for the spring fling dance. If there was a clipboard circulating in a classroom, she found a way to scrawl my name on it. I, of course, was completely oblivious. I went to my classes, ate lunch with my small circle of friends, and went home. I was living my quiet, unassuming life, while my phantom persona was becoming the school's most enthusiastic and most unreliable student. The first signs were subtle. A teacher would mention, "See you at the debate club meeting, Audrey," and I'd just give a confused smile. The basketball coach gave me a disappointed look in the hallway. But the whispers grew louder. I was becoming known as the girl who was all talk, the flake who signed up for everything and committed to nothing. The whole thing came to a head in Mr. Davison's office. He was the school principal, a formidable ex-military man whose glare alone could enforce silence in a crowded cafeteria. His secretary pulled me out of my social studies class with a grim, tight-lipped expression. The walk down the hallway to his office felt like a mile. The linoleum floors squeaked under my sneakers, each sound amplifying my frantic heartbeat. The office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I sat in a stiff leather chair that stuck to the back of my legs. He didn't mince words. He had a stack of sign-up sheets on his desk, my name circled in red on each one. Audrey, he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the desk. I've been a principal for 20 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of prank, every kind of plea for attention. But this is a new level of disrespect. He went on for what felt like an eternity, his voice rising with each sentence. He called me a liar. A manipulator. He accused me of making a mockery of the school's extracurricular programs. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't explain my way out of. How could I possibly say, my 12-year-old sister is a Machiavellian genius who is systematically destroying my reputation? It sounded insane. So, as always, I was silent. He had called my parents. They arrived looking like they were attending a funeral. They walked in, shook Mr. Davison's hand, and sat down without once looking at me. My father, the man who was supposed to be my protector, cleared his throat. Mr. Davison, he said, his voice full of feigned gravity. We are so sorry you've had to deal with this. Audrey has been going through a phase. We've been concerned about her tendency to fabricate things. Rest assured, this will be dealt with severely. My mother nodded sadly, dabbing at a non-existent tear in her eye. They didn't just throw me under the bus, they backed the bus up over me a few times to make sure the job was done. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. I stared out the window, watching the world blur by, feeling utterly and completely alone. That day, I didn't just lose my trust in my parents. High school was a lesson in self-preservation. I learned to be invisible in my own home and to build a life for myself that was entirely separate. The wall I started constructing between me and my sister became my most important project. It was built brick by brick, with every secret I kept, every friend I didn't introduce her to, every detail of my life I withheld. Our conversations became a meaningless dance of superficialities. How was school? Fine. What's for dinner? Pasta. We were roommates who shared a bloodline, nothing more. This wasn't just paranoia, it was a necessary defense mechanism forged in the fires of past betrayals. When I started dating, Sabrina's competitive instincts kicked into a terrifying new gear. She wasn't just trying to win a board game anymore, she was trying to conquer people. Kevin was my first real boyfriend, if you could call it that. We met in 10th grade history class and shared a mutual love for nerdy sci-fi movies. He was shy and kind, and I felt like I could actually be myself around him. We'd been on maybe 4 or 5 dates. One evening, he came over so we could work on a history project together. We were spread out on the living room floor with textbooks and poster board. I went to the kitchen to get us some sodas. It couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. When I came back, Sabrina was there. She had materialized out of nowhere, wearing a pair of shorts that were way too small for her and one of my dad's old t-shirts tied up to show off her midriff. She was perched on the arm of the couch, leaning over Kevin, asking him about the project with a wide, innocent-eyed fascination. Wow, you're so smart, she cooed, touching his shoulder. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The next week, Kevin called me and ended things with a string of mumbled, incoherent excuses. It took me a month to find out from a friend that he and Sabrina had hooked up at a party. The second time was with Daniel, a college guy who worked at the local coffee shop. That one cut deeper. We dated for almost 6 months. He was older, and I thought he was immune to her childish games. I was wrong. Sabrina adored the challenge. She would happen to be at the coffee shop every time I met him there. She'd find excuses to text him, asking for advice about college applications. It was a slow, methodical campaign. The final blow came one night when I drove by his apartment, planning to surprise him. I saw his car parked outside, the windows completely fogged over. I knew, even before I got out of my car, what I would find. I walked up and tapped on the glass. The 2 figures inside jumped apart. It was them. The confrontation was ugly, full of his pathetic excuses and her defiant silence. I remember crying on the phone to my best friend, Jessica, afterward. She was in the middle of her own family drama. Her parents were finalizing their divorce, and the fighting over assets and custody of her younger brother was brutal. She was talking about lawyers and mediation. I tried to listen, to be a good friend, but all I could think was that my wounds felt so much more intimate. There was no court for this kind of betrayal. There were no lawyers for a stolen heart. There was just the quiet, devastating knowledge that my own sister saw my happiness as a prize to be won, a territory to be conquered, and then discarded. The wall around my heart got a little higher that day. After the fiery crash of my relationship with Daniel, I put up a closed for business sign on my heart. I threw myself into my studies, got into a decent state university, and focused on building a future for myself that depended on no one but me. I worked my way through college, got a job in marketing, and slowly climbed the ladder. I was proud of the life I had built. I had my own apartment, a career I enjoyed, and a few close friends who I trusted implicitly. After a few years in the professional world, I even landed a major promotion, and the salary increase that came with it made me feel, for the first time, truly secure and independent. Love was something that happened to other people in movies. And then, on a completely ordinary Tuesday, I met Mark. It was the epitome of a meet-cute. I was at a bookstore after work, trying to find a new novel to get lost in. I had a tall stack of books in my arms and was trying to juggle them with my purse and my phone when a man rounding the corner bumped into me. Books went flying everywhere. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," he said, his voice full of genuine alarm. He immediately knelt to help me, and when he looked up, he had this incredible smile. It wasn't a flirty smile, it was just kind. We started talking, right there on the floor of the fiction aisle. His name was Mark. He was an architect. He had a goofy laugh and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the most fascinating person on the planet. We ended up getting coffee, and a 2-hour conversation felt like 10 minutes. Our relationship was a revelation. It was easy. It was calm. There were no games, no drama. He was steadfast, loving, and supportive. He celebrated my successes and held my hand through my anxieties. With him, the wall I had so carefully constructed around myself began to crumble, brick by brick. He was the first person who made me feel like being vulnerable wasn't a liability. For 2 years, we built a beautiful life together. We went on weekend trips, cooked elaborate dinners, and spent lazy Sundays reading in bed. He was my safe harbor. I still kept him separate from my family. The thought of introducing his goodness to their toxicity felt like a betrayal of him. I fed him vague excuses about them being busy or living too far away. He was patient, never pushing. On the evening of our second anniversary, he took me to the fanciest restaurant in the city. The lights were low, the music was soft, and everything felt magical. We talked about our future, our dreams of buying a house, of traveling. After dinner, we took a walk through a nearby park that was lit up with fairy lights. He stopped me under a huge, ancient oak tree. He took both of my hands in his and looked at me, his expression so full of love and nervous energy it made my heart ache. "Audrey," he started, his voice a little shaky. "These last 2 years have been the best of my life. You make everything better. I can't, and I don't want to, imagine a single day of my future without you in it." And then, he lowered himself to one knee, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and opened it to reveal the most beautiful, simple diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" The yes that came out of my mouth was a sob, a laugh, and a word all rolled into one. It was the easiest yes of my life. As he slid the ring onto my finger, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The ghosts of my past, the betrayals, the loneliness, they all seemed to fade into the background. I had finally found it. My happy ending. The bliss of our engagement lasted for 2 glorious, sun-drenched weeks. But the inevitable was looming. Mark was going to be my husband, he had to meet my family. I braced myself, scheduling a dinner at my parents' house for the following weekend. I spent the entire drive there giving myself a pep talk. Mark is different. He's a grown man. He loves you. Sabrina's pathetic games won't work on him. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere was thick with a cloying, false pleasantness. My parents greeted Mark with strained smiles and a formal handshake. Then, Sabrina descended the stairs. She had clearly put in an effort. She was wearing a red dress that was just a little too tight, her hair and makeup done to perfection. She glided into the room, her eyes zeroing in on Mark, completely ignoring me. Well, she purred, extending a hand to him. You must be Mark. I've heard so much about you. She held his hand for a fraction of a second too long, her gaze slow and deliberate as she looked him up and down. It was a blatant, predatory assessment. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Dinner was an exercise in torture. Sabrina orchestrated the entire conversation, positioning herself as the charming, witty center of attention. She asked Mark about his work as an architect, her questions laced with just enough technical jargon to sound impressive. Oh, that's fascinating. So you must have gotten a huge promotion to be leading a project like that, she'd say, framing it as a compliment while shamelessly probing into his financial status. She regaled him with hilarious and deeply embarrassing stories from our childhood, all of which painted me as an awkward, clumsy oaf and her as the adorable, long-suffering sister. She'd lean in close to him, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at one of his jokes. It was a masterful performance of seduction, disguised as family bonding. My parents just beamed, so proud of their charming, sociable daughter. I sat there, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a ghost at my own engagement dinner. The ride home was heavy with a silence that felt different from our usual comfortable quiet. Mark was the first to speak. So, your sister has a lot of energy, he said, a careful, neutral statement. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to face him, my voice tight with an urgency that startled him. Mark, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to take me seriously. Stay away from her. Do not text her, do not answer her calls if she makes them. When you are around her, be polite, but that's it. She is not your friend. She is dangerous. He looked genuinely taken aback. Audrey, honey, what's wrong? She was just being friendly. I can handle a little flirting. No, you don't understand, I insisted, my voice shaking slightly. This is what she does. This is a game to her, and she has to win. He pulled the car over, his expression softening with concern. He took my hand. Hey! Look at me. I love you. I am marrying you. I don't care about her. I promise you, okay? She means nothing to me. I won't even glance her way. He was so confident, so reassuring. He kissed me, and I let myself believe him. I clung to his promise like a life raft, desperately wanting it to be true. It was the last time I would ever fully trust him. Life settled into the frantic, happy chaos of wedding planning. I was immersed in a world of floral arrangements, cake tastings, and seating charts. It was a welcome distraction. Mark seemed to be pulling away slightly, working longer hours, more stressed than usual. I attributed it to the pressures of his big project at work and the impending wedding. I tried to be the supportive fiancé, leaving him dinner in the oven, giving him space when he seemed distant. The distance was a low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my happiness, a quiet warning I chose to ignore. The explosion came via text message, just 3 months before our wedding day. It was from Sabrina. We need to talk. It's urgent. Meet me at the daily grind in an hour. No explanation. Just a command. My heart felt like it dropped into my shoes. I drove to the coffee shop in a daze, 1,000 worst-case scenarios playing out in my mind. She was already there, in a booth by the window, calmly sipping a latte. She looked up as I approached, and her expression was one of serene, almost smug satisfaction. I sat down, my hands trembling in my lap. "What's wrong, Sabrina? What's so urgent?" She took another delicate sip of her coffee before meeting my eyes. Her voice was light, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "I'm pregnant, Audrey." The air left my lungs. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of it. Why was she telling me? What did this have to do with me? I opened my mouth to ask, but she cut me off. "And," she said, leaning forward, her eyes glinting with a malicious joy that I will never forget, "before you start doing the math, I thought I should let you know. I slept with your fiancé a few days ago. I'm sure he's the daddy to my freshly conceived baby." Time stopped. The sounds of the coffee shop, the grinding of beans, the hiss of the milk steamer, the chatter of other customers, all faded into a dull, roaring silence in my ears. She reached into her purse, pulled out 2 positive pregnancy tests, and laid them on the table between us with a soft click. They looked obscene, like weapons left at a crime scene. She was beaming, absolutely radiant with her news. The joy she felt wasn't about the baby. It was about the destruction. It was about winning the final, ultimate prize. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the drive. My next coherent memory is of me standing in the middle of our pristine living room, the one with the wedding invitation samples still spread out on the coffee table. When Mark came home from work, whistling, he stopped dead in the doorway. He saw my face, and the color drained from his. He knew. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was pathetic. The truth came out in a torrent of stammers and pathetic excuses. I don't know how it happened. It was a mistake. She was going through a hard time. It didn't mean anything, Audrey, I swear. Didn't mean anything. Those 3 words severed the last thread of love I had for him. He had taken our future, our promises, our love, and thrown it all away for a cheap, meaningless fling with the one person on earth he knew could destroy me. I looked at this stranger standing in my living room, and I felt a cold, terrifying emptiness. The fight just drained out of me. "Pack your things," I said, my voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "Get out of my house." He tried to argue, to plead, but it was like he was speaking a foreign language. I walked into the kitchen and started making phone calls, my fingers moving on autopilot. The caterer. The florist. The venue. With each call, I spoke the same dead words: "I'm calling to cancel the wedding of Audrey and Mark." The life I was supposed to have was being dismantled, one phone call at a time. I was a demolition expert, tearing down my own future. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment the number 1, and listen as I continue my story. After the fallout, my world felt small and suffocating. Every street corner held a memory, every restaurant was a place Mark and I had been. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a tomb. I had to get out. Not just out of the apartment, but out of the city, out of the country. I needed to be somewhere no one knew my name or my story. On impulse, fueled by grief and a desperate need for escape, I drained a significant portion of my savings and bought a one-way ticket to Paris. I packed 2 large suitcases with essentials, sold what I could of my furniture for pennies on the dollar, and left the rest on the curb. I wrote a brief, cold email to my parents saying I was taking a job transfer and would be out of touch for a while. I only told my friend Jessica the truth. She drove me to the airport, her face a mixture of worry and pride. We hugged for a long time at the departure gate, a silent promise to stay in touch passing between us. The first few weeks in Paris were a blur of loneliness and culture shock. I found a tiny, furnished apartment in the 6th arrondissement, barely big enough for a bed and a small table. I didn't speak the language beyond a few high school French phrases. I remember my first trip to the grocery store, a humiliating experience where I ended up just pointing at things, my face burning with embarrassment. There were nights I lay awake, the sounds of a foreign city filtering through my window, and I would be consumed by a wave of grief so intense it felt like drowning. I tried to cook once, an ambitious cocoa vin, and burned it so badly I set off the smoke alarm. The blaring noise, my broken French trying to explain to the concerned neighbor who knocked on my door, it was all too much. I slid to the kitchen floor and sobbed until I was empty. But slowly, Paris began to heal me. I established a routine. I started my remote marketing job, which forced me to have a schedule and interact with colleagues on video calls, a lifeline to normalcy. Every morning, I would walk to a nearby boulangerie and buy a warm pain au chocolate, practicing my French with the patient woman behind the counter. Bonjour. Un pain au chocolat, s'il vous plaît. Her warm smile in return was a small victory that set the tone for my day. I started taking long, aimless walks. I discovered the quiet magic of the Jardin du Luxembourg, the chaotic beauty of the street markets, the solemn peace inside the ancient churches. I would sit for hours at outdoor cafes, nursing a single cup of coffee, reading books, and watching the impossibly chic Parisians go by. I was anonymous. I was free. I wasn't a victim or a tragic figure. I was just a woman rebuilding her life, one cobblestone street at a time. The crushing weight on my chest began to lift. I started to laugh again, genuine, unforced laughs. It was a fragile peace, one I knew was temporary. But for 6 months, I breathed clean air. I was unbeholden to anyone. It was the most important and restorative time of my life. But my savings were dwindling, and my remote work contract was ending. I couldn't stay forever. The thought of returning to the place where everything had fallen apart filled me with a deep, visceral dread. Coming back was harder than I could have imagined. The familiar streets and buildings felt alien, haunted by ghosts of a life that no longer belonged to me. I found a new apartment, a small, sterile one-bedroom in a part of town I rarely frequented, hoping to create a clean slate. For 3 days, I was surrounded by boxes and silence. I was beginning to think I might actually be able to pull it off, to live a quiet, disconnected life. That hope was shattered by a loud, insistent pounding on my front door on the 3rd night. My heart leaped into my throat. Through the peephole, I saw the faces of my parents, distorted by the lens, their expressions grim and furious. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. My father stormed in, his face blotchy and red. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice booming in the small, empty apartment. "Your mother has been worried sick. You disappear for 6 months with a single email, and now we find out from Jessica's mother where you are." My mom followed, already dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "And in the meantime, your poor sister has run away," she wailed. "She's 21 years old, pregnant, and alone, and it is all your fault." I just stared at them, my mind struggling to comprehend the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their words. The world tilted on its axis. I was the one who had been betrayed. I was the one who had to cancel my wedding, flee the country, and piece my life back together. And somehow, in the twisted narrative they had created, I was once again the villain. My sister, the architect of my ruin, was now the damsel in distress. My fault? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Are you actually serious right now?" "Of course, it's your fault," my mother sobbed. "You humiliated her. You cut her off, you turned everyone against her, all because of one little mistake. You made her feel so ashamed that she had to run away from her own home. One little mistake." The phrase echoed in the silent room. And in that moment, years of suppressed anger, of swallowed injustices, erupted to the surface. The compliant, quiet Audrey ceased to exist. A little mistake? I heard myself shouting, my voice raw with a fury that felt ancient. She slept with my fiancé. She deliberately got pregnant to destroy my wedding, and she threw it in my face like a trophy. And you call that a little mistake? I was pacing now, my body thrumming with adrenaline. You want to talk about fault? Let's talk about the broken vase. Let's talk about the principal's office, where you stood there and called me a liar to save your own pathetic faces. You have protected her, enabled her, and rewarded her monstrous behavior my entire life. You didn't raise a daughter, you raised a sociopath. I strode to the door and flung it wide open. Get out, I snarled, pointing into the hallway. Get out of my apartment and get out of my life. I am done. We are done. They stared at me, their mouths agape, shocked into silence by this new, ferocious version of their daughter. For the first time, they looked truly afraid of me. They stumbled out the door, and I slammed it shut behind them, the sound echoing the final, brutal severance of our family ties. After I kicked my parents out, a strange sort of peace settled over me. It was the peace of a battlefield after the war is finally over. The silence in my apartment was absolute. And for a few weeks, it stayed that way. I started the slow process of rebuilding, found a new contract job, and began to cautiously believe that I might have finally severed the toxic ties to my past. But the universe, it seems, has a cruel sense of humor. One Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Not the frantic pounding of my parents, but a light, almost cheerful rap. I opened it to find Sabrina standing on my doorstep. She was hugely pregnant now, her belly stretching the fabric of a bright yellow maternity dress. She was smiling, a wide, beatific smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, sis," she chirped, and before I could react, she pushed past me into my apartment. I was just in the neighborhood. Mark and I found a place just a few blocks from here. Isn't that a fun coincidence? She waddled into my small living room and plopped down on my couch, sighing dramatically. Oof. Carrying this little guy is exhausting. I stood frozen by the doorway, my mind trying to process the sheer audacity. She was acting as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't systematically dismantled my entire life. She patted her belly and looked up at me, her face glowing with a smug maternal pride. Mark is just being the best. He waits on me hand and foot. He sings to the baby every night. We just finished the nursery. It's done in this adorable safari theme. He's going to be the most incredible father, I just know it. Every word was a poisoned dart. She wasn't just sharing news, she was twisting the knife, describing in painstaking detail the life that should have been mine, with the man who should have been my husband. It was a calculated, cruel performance designed to inflict maximum pain. She was showing me everything she had stolen, gift-wrapped in a sunny, domestic package. I was speechless. My brain couldn't supply the words to respond to this level of delusion and malice. It felt like I was in a surreal play, and I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. She finally seemed to register my stunned silence. She tilted her head, her expression one of faux concern. What's the matter, Audrey? You look like you've seen a ghost. Aren't you happy for me? After all, you're going to be an aunt soon. You should be excited. Excited. The word hung in the air between us, obscene and absurd. And in that moment, all the anger, all the grief, just evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a person I could reason with. This wasn't a relationship I could fix. This was a sickness, and the only cure was amputation. I looked at her, at the stranger with my sister's face, and I knew with chilling certainty what I had to do. There was only one move left to make. Watching Sabrina sit on my couch, lovingly stroking the belly that contained the evidence of her ultimate betrayal, was the final confirmation I needed. My life here was over. Any lingering thoughts I had of salvaging some piece of my old existence, of finding a way to coexist in the same city with these people, vanished. They would never stop. She would never stop. As long as I was within her reach, I would always be her target. The moment she left, after an awkward, one-sided conversation where I just stared at her until she grew uncomfortable and made her excuses, I went straight to my laptop. This time, there was no grief-fueled impulse. It was a cold, logical, strategic retreat. I wasn't running away from them, I was running towards my own life. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled my life with the precision of a bomb squad technician. I gave my notice at my new job. I put my car up for sale online and sold it for cash to the first person who made a decent offer. I sold what little furniture I had and donated the rest. My life was methodically reduced, once again, to the contents of 2 suitcases. The only person I told was Jessica. We had one last dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. I laid out the whole plan for her. I was going back to France, but not to the same apartment in Paris. I was going to a smaller city, starting fresh. I was changing my name legally. I was getting a new phone number. I was, for all intents and purposes, going to become a ghost. She cried, of course. She made me promise to stay in touch through a secret, encrypted email address. Don't let them erase you, she pleaded. I'm not, I told her, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm finally writing my own story. On the day of my flight, after the movers had taken the last of my boxes to a storage unit Jessica would manage, I did a final walkthrough of the empty apartment. The rooms echoed with silence. I took my phone out of my pocket and began the final ritual. I opened my contacts and found my mother's name. Delete. My father. Delete. And finally, Sabrina. I paused for a moment, looking at her name on the screen. Then, with a firm press of my thumb, she was gone. I walked out, dropped the keys on the counter, and didn't look back. At the airport, waiting at the gate, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt since I was a child. It wasn't the frantic, desperate escape of my first flight. It was a calm, deliberate journey towards a future I would build myself, on my own terms. The plane took off, climbing high above the city, and I watched the familiar landscape dissolve into a tapestry of lights below. I wasn't just leaving a place. I was leaving a version of myself behind, the victim, the target, the long-suffering sister. And I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that I would never, ever be her again. Thank you so much for sticking with me and listening to my entire story. It's not an easy one to tell, but sharing it feels like the final step in taking my power back. If any part of this resonated with you, or if you've had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace, I would be so grateful to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories and your support remind me that none of us are alone in these struggles. Please, like this video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more in the future. It truly means the world.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.